All right, you guys, Shalom, welcome. What I'm about to reveal to you um, is, in my opinion, very profound. I've been teaching on this subject for several years, consistently, and each year I'm just basically just kind of scratching the surface. But this time is the first time that I think I am revealing or teaching this with a full understanding of what has taken place. Mostly because I had to look at what was taking place with the Jews in the Talmud. And, because when I first approached this, I assumed that the rabbis and the Jewish people I had already figured this out and how knew it. And then I have since learned that, quite frankly, there's a lot that's been hidden, especially after the destruction of the Second Temple. So I had to go down a lot of rabbit trails, and not only looking at historical events and historical accounts, and even studying the agriculture. You guys, I put so much time in studying this one subject over the past, I don't know, 7, 8 years, just to reconcile this one point in the Bible that has been so misinterpreted and so misunderstood for so long, for over 2,000 years. And it started with the Jews, and the Christians adopted some things from the Jews, and then we get certain Christian traditions, and I'm talking about Pentecost, and it lost its connection to the grain. I'm going to show you here with scripture and with logic and reason, even some AI, that what I've been telling you is true, which is shocking to me that it's taken this long. And I had to go I mean, you guys, it is insane the amount of hours. It's insane the amount of hours that I have to put into this because I had to go and learn specifics about agriculture, grains, barley, wheat, rye, grapes, olives. And not only this, I had to learn it for a specific region to put all this together. And this one day we're trying to establish is probably one of the most important days on the calendar. And that day is Shavuot, when Yah had poured out his spirit upon the disciples and those there that got saved. Not necessarily in the upper room, as I have discovered, because it doesn't say that in the text. The day before they're in the upper room, but it doesn't say on the day of Shavuot that they were there. It just says they were in one mind and one accord. And it's more likely that they were in the temple when this was going on, because this was a temple ritual when the wave offering of the bread is taking place with the priest and Yah pours out his spirit. They probably were somewhere in the close proximity of the temple when all this is going on. And therefore, all the people who spoke all the different languages that they heard disciples speak were there present. And there were thousands of people there. Anyway, what I've discovered with looking at the Jewish historical account and some of the commentary and some of the interpretation, we come back to two main ones, and one being Rashi, the other being the Rambam. I want to focus on this particular study on Rashi, because it's something, just reading in his bio on Wikipedia, you find something really interesting about him. Now, he is the rabbi that interpreted the Tanakh. You see, after Yeshua these rabbis had a problem because there was a lot of Jews that interpret the scriptures that was written in Greek, the Septuagint, especially all the ones about the Messiah, to be referring to Yeshua. And so there had to be a counter to this. And what it was is these rabbis said, oh, they just got it wrong. They misinterpreted what these scriptures were saying. And so therefore there came this observance in Judaism that the common person is really not qualified to interpret what the scripture says. So therefore, you need rabbis to tell you what it means. Okay, and so certain scriptures you're not as a Jew. I'm speaking in Judaism, rabbinic Judaism to be specific. You're not allowed to read certain scriptures. Okay, and when it comes to the Tanakh, it's better to read the Talmud and what a rabbi tells you what the Talmud is saying. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, one of the most revered rabbis that these Jews follow in interpretation is Rashi. Now, Rashi is the one who interpreted Isaiah 53 to mean it was about the nation and not about a man. Okay. And also he is also the rabbi who interpreted the stories of the Bible to be more or less allegory and not necessarily real true stories. So keep that in mind as well. Okay. So Moses wasn't a real figure. David probably didn't exist. Abraham probably didn't exist. So it's all allegory, and it's morals and a way to live, and it's really part of our culture. But these are just things that are made up. Okay, so that's basically Rashi. And by the way, Rambam contradicts him. Okay, so there's a contradiction between the Rambam and Rashi. Rashi is a little different in his interpretation. So the point is, Rashi interprets the Bible or gives a commentary on a large portion of the scriptures, except for, and I find this really interesting, guys. I want to show you this. First of all, before we get into anything else, because they always go back to Rashi and what Rashi said. Now, Rashi existed, and listen, this is my birthday, February 22nd, so this stands out to me like really profound. Rashi existed in the 10th and 11th century, and he's interpreting the Bible. And this is becoming a commentary of the Talmud, okay? Now, you can go and read. I'm not going to read all this about Rashi. That's not the point of this. What I want to point out about this is he was trying to counter the believers of Yeshua and the interpretation of the scriptures that they were attributing to Yeshua. Rashi was trying to counter that. Okay, in the Middle Ages, by the way, and it even highlights that in the Middle Ages. So this is a long time after the destruction of the Second Temple. We get somebody in France who's, anyway, I'm not going to disparage anybody, but I want to go all, you can go read this yourself. I want to go all the way down to his commentary on the Tanakh and point out that Rashi wrote commentaries on all the books of the Tanakh. So when Jews today go to try to understand what it says in the Bible, they go to Rashi, some of them, and some goes to Rambam, okay? But for Rashi, he was excluded from being able to interpret Chronicles 1 and 2 and Ezra and Nehemiah. His commentary on Job was incomplete, ending at chapter 40, verse 25. So he never did get to 1st and 2nd Chronicles and Nehemiah. Now, first of all, why is this important? Why does this stand out? Well, I'll tell you that. This is the place of restoration. It's the place of restoration. And it's particularly in the period of that. We're talking about between the first and second temple and more toward when we get back into the Torah, because under Zerubbabel and Joshua, when they rebuild the temple, or they start to rebuild the temple, and this took a while, by the way, with about a 16-year interlude between the completion and the beginning of rebuilding of the second temple. And mind you, Haggai had prophesied that the second temple would be greater than the first. However, that didn't seem to happen. It didn't appear to be to anyone when it was finally completed to be greater than Solomon's temple. And this was a great discouragement. And by the way, between the time of Zerubbabel and Joshua and Nehemiah and Ezra is many years, many years. You know, I think it's over 150 years or even more. Okay. Before Ezra and Nehemiah come back to, so this is a long time after Cyrus the Great's proclamation to rebuild the temple and let the Jews go back home. Okay, so this is toward, and I think the temple had been erected for 50 years by the time Ezra and Nehemiah get on the scene. And again, we're going to see that Ezra is bringing the Torah. He's coming to teach everybody the Torah and Yah's ways again. And he gets there on a specific day. Not only that, the Bible tells us a specific day that he leaves and a specific day that he arrives. And then he accounts or recounts what he saw in those days. Very significant to the reconciliation of this particular day I've been telling you about, because it's time specific. I didn't see this years ago, because when I started to study, it has only been in this season that God has revealed to me literally in the footsteps of Nehemiah and Ezra, when this was. All right. So let's just go to Ezra 7. All right. Like I said, Ezra and Nehemiah are coming back into Jerusalem after the temple's already been rebuilt. And they've tried to get back to the ways of Yah for some time now. But it was only under Ezra and Nehemiah did they have the Torah and could really understand, because they had supposedly had preserved this in Babylon, and it was hidden from them. Then suddenly it was revealed to them. Other legends say that it was actually in Jerusalem that the Torah was found, and Ezra was given permission to go back and teach the Torah. But as the Bible records, we're going to start in Ezra 7. And I'm hitting the bullet points here, you guys. Just first of all, the story of Ezra and Nehemiah is just a small fraction of the rebuilding and the restoration of the second temple. Okay, just to be clear, there's a lot of things that happen from Zerubbabel and Joshua and Nehemiah. And by the way, Haggai was up there with Zerubbabel. All right, so Haggai was the prophet up there, and even Zechariah. So in Ezra's day, the prophet was Nehemiah. All right, so a lot has happened. And so in Ezra's day, they're coming back, and Ezra comes with some of the remnant back to Jerusalem, and it takes some time to get there, and an abnormal amount of time. If you Google it, how long it takes to walk from Babylon back to Jerusalem, for an average person, it's about anywhere from a month to 6 weeks. But for some reason, we see in Ezra 7, and I find the actual verse where it starts is phenomenal, because in every case, and incidentally, in every case that I'm pointing out, this has something to do with the calendar. Here's one here. 8. And he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. For upon the first day of the first month, which is Abib 1, is when he left Babylon. So on the first day of the first month, he began to go up from Babylon. And on the first day of the fifth month, he came to Jerusalem. So it took him exactly 4 months to get from Babylon to Jerusalem. Now, why is that? Now, scholars say because it only takes a month. And you would ask yourself, why did it take so long to Ezra to get there? Well, he was coming back with a remnant. He was coming back with a lot of priests and their families and things like that. He was coming back to restore the temple to what it was supposed to be now that it was completed. And by the way, by this time, I think it was 50 years that the temple had been completed. All right. So he's coming back to teach the Torah and reestablish the priesthood and reestablish the Sabbath and all that kind of stuff. But he gets there on a specific day. Now, remember, he leaves on the first of Aviv, and he gets there on the first day of the fifth month. What does that look like? Let me show you. On the lunar solar calendar, of course, that's what we're going to be using. I'm going to show you what that looks like. It looks like this. So he left in the spring. This is after the spring equinox, right? The first day of the first month is right here. Okay. And for 1, 2, 3, 4 months, he is traveling to Jerusalem, and look what day he arrives. Now, I've been saying this in my group, because if you do the count and you do, a straight count, and we don't observe the new moons, because there can be a number of new moons in this count, right? You're going to end up right here at the last Sabbath of the 4th month, right? And we're talking about 7 Sabbaths complete and in 50 days in the count. But new moon day, the first day of the 5th month. So what I'm saying is, what I've been telling you is that Shavuot is really in this area right here. It's right at new moon time. From this Sabbath to this new moon day is when we're talking about. Ezra is arriving on this day right here, the first day of the 5th month, right? Let's go back to the scriptures. The first day of the 5th month. So you can see that. That's what we're seeing. And he came into Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was on the 7th year of the king. For upon the first day of the first month began he to go up from Babylon, and on the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem. So let's establish if what I'm telling you is right, because what I'm proposing to you, based on research, is the wheat was planted around the 1st of Abib, and around this time that he is arriving to Jerusalem is the harvest time. Okay, it's the first day of the 5th month. This is around what, if you go by the correct count, you're going to end up right here. Okay. Now, just to establish this, I asked AI, because you can find a lot of misinformation on the internet. But what AI does is it goes on billions and billions and billions of lines of information, and it gives you what is interpreted as to be the truth. To determine when the harvest of the spring wheat would begin in the Second Temple Israel, consider the following points. Spring wheat is typically planted in early Aviv, around April. To be more specific, the 1st of Aviv. The growing season of spring wheat is approximately 4 months. It's not 3 months, it's 4 months. Harvesting usually occurs when the grains are fully mature and dry in the field. The whole field is golden. In Second Temple Israel, this would likely place the wheat harvest around late summer. Therefore, expect the harvest to begin around what? July to August. So where is that on the map, on the calendar we just saw? Exactly where AI is telling you the beginning of the wheat harvest is. All right. So this is the beginning of the summer harvest, you guys. And just to look at this in another way, let's look at when the barley is harvested and what it says here, just to give you the comparison, because this gets misconstrued and misunderstood. To understand the barley cultivation in early Second Temple, consider the following points. Barley was typically planted in the fall, around October, November. Incidentally, barley and wheat, the spring wheat, have about the same growth period, 120 days, 4 months. Okay. If they are planted at the same time, they would be harvested at the same time, but they are not. And we know they're not because we know the growing cycle of the crescent, the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. And we can see from scripture that the cycle is staggered. We can see this from Exodus 9, as I'm going to show you. Barley was harvested in the late spring and early summer around May and June. Now, why is this significant? Because I've been telling you that the only grain available at Shabbat at the 50-day count is what? Barley. And look at here, the harvest period is often linked to the feast of Shavuot. An AI summary is telling you, and by the way, he's got no dog in the fight. He's not biased. He's telling you the plain truth there. This harvest is often linked to the Feast of Shavuot incorrectly, by the way, because we know Shavuot is the beginning of the wheat harvest, which is another 7 weeks from this point. Okay? Barley was the first of the grains to be ripened, and farmers relied on seasonal rains for irrigation during the growth period. Now, these growth periods are staggered. They're not planted at the same time. And I should have showed you this. I should have showed you this because because the confusion that you can find if you just Googling stuff right here. Like if you're trying to reconcile the wheat, for instance, the way to look at that is you got to go back to ancient times and specifically identify what kind of wheat we're talking about. And so we're looking at the Fertile Crescent of that area and what was grown there. But if you go to places like this right here, and I think this is a Catholic website, you're gonna get some information that is very misleading, you guys. Where it says barley and wheat were planted in the autumn and ripened in the spring. Barley matured much faster and would be harvested sooner. Okay, so let's examine this. Both have a growth period of 120 days. If you plant both seeds, it is true that both are going to take a 120-day period to become fully mature and harvestable. What this website is suggesting is that one grows slower in this period and is harvested sooner, which makes no sense to me. Both have a growth period of 120 days, meaning if it's possible to plant both at the same time, and it's not, these two are not planted at the same time, because they are 120 days to harvest, you would literally harvest these at the same time. So in Exodus 9, when it says that the barley was in ear and was smitten, and the wheat was not come up yet, and it wasn't smitten, it is telling you that the growth period is different. Does everybody understand that? I realize there's some people out there that have no clue, and they're not farmers. They don't understand this, but I'm trying to break this down to the most rudimental way for you to understand this. Barley and wheat is not planted at the same time, and not in ancient times, in the Fertile Crescent with emmer wheat. Emmer wheat is planted on a B1. Barley is planted a few months earlier than that. Therefore, it's more advanced when it's coming up. Does that make sense? So you run into, and this is the very first thing that comes up in the Google search, right under the AI answer to me. But if you go here, you're going to be highly misled at grace communion. Just saying, you guys, just saying, okay? Exodus 9. And I'm going to give you a visual on this. Exodus 9 gives you a picture. If you're able to see what's happening with the seventh plague of hail that comes down on the agriculture, right? And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the ear and the flax was bold, okay? Which means it was fruiting at the time. But look what it says here. But the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up yet. And when we look at that a little closer in the Hebrew, it literally says because it was just planted. It was still germinating. So obviously in Exodus 9, we can see that the wheat and the barley are not germinating at the same time. Therefore, that website and the lady in Israel who is giving the barley report, I could see where you got your information. You're also wrong. The wheat was not smitten because it had not broken the ground yet. It was hidden. But yet the barley was. What does that look like? What does that look like? Let me give you the visual. This is the visual here. This is what it looks like. And even though I'm using a chart on barley and wheat are very similar, and they look similar in their growth, but they're very distinguishable. Now, at the time that the barley is being smitten, and listen, just a few chapters later, when we get to Pentecost and we learn from Leviticus 23, the process that's going place here with the wave offering we're doing with barley and what it looks like, we're in that time period. So in the time period of the wave offering, because we're talking about ripening between this point and this point, at the ripening of the barley, what does the wheat look like? It looks like this right here. Why? Because it's just been planted. It's only been planted about 2 weeks. So at the wave sheaf offering, which is right here, a couple of weeks down the road, or just down the road, the wheat is not affected by the hail because it's just coming up. It looks like grass at the time of the hail, which is going to be further back. At the time of the wave sheaf offering is a couple of days later. Remember, the Passover comes after the hail, okay? But we see in Leviticus that this coincides with a wave offering of ripening Aviv barley, which is going to look like this, something like that. Now, which is going to be harvested next, the wheat or the barley? Or should I say, which is going to be harvested first, the wheat or the barley? It's the barley, you guys. Because 50 days later, we're counting Shavuot or Pentecost. That is actually the barley that's being harvested. It's not the wheat. The wheat still has another 7 weeks. Why? Because it's way back here. It's way back here. It's simple logic that tells you that if you understand agriculture. One of the most misinterpreted scriptures to this whole conundrum goes back to Deuteronomy. All right. Now, mind you, in Leviticus, where we're giving the law and we're told specifically what to do, it doesn't exactly say that in Deuteronomy. But yet, what I find in the reinterpretation with Rashi and some of the rabbis is they like to come to Deuteronomy 16:9, where, well, let's just take a look at that. You'll see what it says there. It's better to look at it in the Hebrew, but we're going to look at this. Now, starting at verse 1. Now, we're in Deuteronomy, which is clearly after Leviticus. And what happens is it's the feast season is being reiterated, and it's given bullet points, and some facts are left out. For instance, one very important one, and the verses 1 through 8. Starting with verse 1, observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover of Yah, for the month of Abib and Yah, thy God, brought thee out of the land of Egypt by night, that thou shalt sacrifice the Passover unto Yah, thy Elohim, of the flock and of the herd. And in the place that Yah had chosen to place his name there, thou art to eat no leavened bread. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread there within, even the bread of affliction. For thou camest out of the land of Egypt in haste, and thou makest remember the day that thou camest forth out of the land of Egypt in all the days of thy life. And there shall be no unleavened bread with thee in all thy coasts in 7 days, neither shall anything of the flesh which thou sacrifice in the gates the day at evening, remaining all night until morning. Thou mayest not sacrifice the Passover within the gates which thou, Adonai, thy Elohim gaveth thee, but in the place with Yah, thy Elohim shall choose, and to place his name in there, thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at evening, and at the going down of the sun, at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt, and thou shalt roast and eat it in the same place in which Yah your Elohim shall choose, and thou shalt turn in the morning, and shall go into thy tent. 6 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day thou shalt have a solemn assembly unto Yah your Elohim, and do no work therein. Did you notice anything missing there? Where's the mention of the wave offering that you do when you enter into the land? You see, they weren't in the land at this point, and Yah is just hitting the bullet points that they could do, okay? But notice the next line. It goes into the Feast of Weeks. It completely skips over the barley wave and goes into Shavuot. And look what it says. 7 weeks shalt thy number unto thee. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such time as thou beginnest to put the sickle to thee. And it doesn't mean corn there in the Hebrew. It means new grain. And then it says, and thou shalt keep the feast of weeks unto Yah, Shavuot, with the tribute of freewill offering of thine hand, and thou shalt give unto Yah thy Elohim, right? And you can clearly see if you compare Deuteronomy 16 with Leviticus 23, there's clear differences there. And the reason for that is Yah's just hitting bullet points here because it is expected that you understand Leviticus 23. This is called the law of first mention in hermeneutics. All right. You need to understand that. The only way that you can understand Deuteronomy 16 is if you already understand the context of Leviticus 23. Because clearly he completely omits the wave offering, right? But let's look at the Feast of Weeks here a little bit closer. 7 weeks shalt thou number unto thee. Begin to number the 7 weeks from such time as thou begin to put the sickle to the new grain. What new grain are we talking about? Because I've seen videos of Rabbi Sachs inferring and interpreting that it means to, when you begin to harvest the wheat, you count 7 weeks, and therefore your harvest season is going to be 7 weeks long. No, that is not what it's saying. Remember what I showed you in the chart before, the growth cycle of the wheat and the barley? What's coming into season first? The new grain of Abib is going to be barley. The corn is a misinterpretation here. I can show you in the Hebrew it's new grain. It is not corn. The King James interprets it as corn, but corn is a summer harvest as well. It doesn't even fit there. We're talking about barley here. When you put the sickle to the barley and you start harvesting, why would we be harvesting barley at this point? Because this is where we are at the 50 count. That's where we are at the 50 count, is harvesting barley. Just like you saw AI is saying, typically at this point, it's celebrated as Shavuot, which is clearly wrong. But look what it says. When you begin to harvest the new grain, and thou shalt keep the feast of unto Yah. Let's look at it in the Hebrew. It's a little better understanding. Hebrew 16:9. I don't really like the King James. All right. 7 weeks you shall count for yourself from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. See, it doesn't say corn, it's new grain. And then begin to count 7 weeks. Let's look at that again. From the time you put the sickle to the grain, what grain? We're talking about barley. He's talking about when you start harvesting the barley, count 7 more weeks. And if you do the count like I've been telling you guys, it puts you to the same place, which is Shavuot. Look at that. Look at that. From the time you put the sickle to the grain, begin to count 7 weeks. Shavuot. It's there in the Hebrew. Shavuot. That's Shavuot. When you put the sickle to the grain, the barley, you got 7 more weeks. And that is Shavuot. And guess what? Ezra is arriving on that day. Ezra is arriving, like I showed you on the count. If he left on the first day of Abib when it's planted, and he travels for 4 months, and he gets there on the first day of the 5th month, which I've proposed to you is Shavuot. What does he see? What does he see? Well, it's recorded in Nehemiah, you guys. It's recorded in Nehemiah what he saw. Let me take you there. Nehemiah 13. Now Nehemiah nor Ezra is chronological. Okay, there's some jumping around here. And at this particular point, Nehemiah is summarizing everything that is said and written, okay? Now notice that he says, on the day that they read the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation forever, right? He's talking about on that day. All this is known here. But look at this. Ezra, Ezra is saying this, not Nehemiah. Nehemiah just recorded it. This is Ezra speaking. in those days. What day? When I arrived. And by the way, Ezra and Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem at the same time, which was the first day of the 5th month. And what did they see? In those days, I saw Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath. Now, does that fit? Because yes, that is absolutely the Sabbath. Look at the dates there, the 29th and the 1st. And it says, in those days, what days? When I arrived in Jerusalem, what did I find? I saw Judah treading the wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sheaves of what? Well, at this point, if you did the count correctly, which is 7 weeks after they put the sickle to the grain, they're bringing in sheaves of wheat and lading asses also with wine. Does that fit? Yeah, absolutely fits, because we know in the upper room in Acts 2, they were accused of being what? New wine. This is when new wine is available. It's only available from day 3 to day 21 of its process when it's being crushed. And what are they doing at this time? All matters of burden which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, and I testified against them where they sold victuals, and there dwelt men of Tyre therein, and they which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem. And I contended to the nobles of Jerusalem, and said to them, what evil is this that you do, that you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus? And did not Elohim bring all evil upon us and upon this city? And yet you bring wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. And it came to pass, when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates, and they should no burden be brought on the Sabbath day. So the merchants and the sellers and all the ware, right? So at the time, he's recounting what he saw. All right, so all manners of burdens, they're pressing the wine presses. They're pressing grapes. This is the time of new wine, folks. What do we see? All right, so when he gets there, what does he do? Well, we can go back to, because when we see, and it's weird because it's not chronological, but we can see in Ezra 7, 8, Ezra 8, Nehemiah 8, Nehemiah 8, Ezra is speaking. Nehemiah is recording what Ezra is doing. And by the way, Ezra is part of the priesthood. Ezra reads the law. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man unto the street that was before the water gate. And they spoke unto Ezra and the scribe to bring the law of Moses, which Yah had commanded to Israel. And Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation and before the men and the women and all that would hear with understanding upon the first day of the 7th month. So this is 1 month later. So he got there on Shavuot time, and he sees what they're doing, and they're pressing wine presses and all that kind of stuff. So he spends a whole month, the 6th month, getting them ready for this point here, because they're coming into what at the 7th month? The conclusion of the harvest season, which is what? Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Sukkot is the feast of ingathering. It is the completion of the harvest, right? So Ezra has been teaching them, and he's bringing them together on the very first day, Yom Teruah. They're blowing trumpets. And he read therein before the street that was before, and the water gate, from the morning till midday. And before the men and the women, and all those that could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive unto the book of the law. Not the Talmud, the Torah. And Ezra the scribe stood upon the pulpit of wood, which they had made for the purpose. And besides him stood, and it goes through a list of names. And it says, Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was above the people. He was standing above them. And when he opened it, all the people stood up. And Ezra blessed Yah, the great Elohim, and all the people answered, Amen and Amen, with lifting up their hands. And they bowed their heads, and they worshiped Yah with their face to the ground. And also Yeshua and Bani, and it goes through all these names. And the Levite caused the people to understand the law, and the people stood their place. So they read the book of the law distinctly and gave the sense. Now think about what he just said there. They read the book distinctly, letter by letter, word by word, not fast, slowly, and gave sense and caused them to understand the reading. And then it goes in, he teaches them about the Feast of Booths, because that's the season they're in. The Feast of Sukkot is the Feast of Ingathering, right? And on the second day they were gathered, the chief of the fathers and all the people and the priests and all the Levites unto Ezra the scribe, and even to understand the words of the law. And they found written in the law which Yah had commanded by Moses, and that the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month, and that they should publish and proclaim in all their cities in Jerusalem, saying, Go forth on the mountain and fetch the olive branches. And right? So they are literally relearning everything at this point. They had set aside the agriculture. They knew how to grow things, but they didn't know how it lined up with Yah's days. But Nehemiah and Ezra did, and they put it all together. Now, when Ezra gets there and with Nehemiah's recording what Ezra says. In those days, what were they doing? They were trading wine presses, and they were bringing in sheaves of wheat. That is the summer harvest. And when you do the count, folks, when you literally look at the trek that they took, they left on the 1st of Abib, which is literally the day they plant the seed of the wheat. Emmer wheat is what we're talking about. Specifically, the day that they arrive in Jerusalem, the wheat harvest is ready to go. They're ready to start harvesting. And what we see in the text, it's that season. And then he gets into the 7th month, which is the completion of that season. And he's teaching them about the keeping of the feast. Folks, it's all there for us to see. And for some reason, Yah has hid this until the end times. And listen, I don't know if there's anybody else that had figured this out even 100 years ago, 200 years ago. I don't know. You don't see anybody writing about it. But it is so. Somehow or another, the agriculture was lost. The Sabbath was lost, and everything became disconnected. Yah hid this day, but he also promised Judah that he was going to cause their feast days to be mourning. And what do when we do the count correctly, what do we see? It is right in the middle of where they celebrate from Tammuz 17 to Tish B'Av 10, which is 3 weeks of mourning. Right in the middle of that is Shavuot, the most important feast day, hidden in the middle of a time of mourning. And he promises them in Amos 8 that he's going to turn their feast into more. It started with the temple, first and second. Yeshua coming, fulfilling what he would be. the fulfillment of these feasts, even prophesying the second temple would be destroyed. And what Amos 8 would ultimately come to mean for the Jews, that they would completely be cut off from Yah because they had rejected Yeshua. That's what happened, folks. But he preserved this day in the agriculture and in what he wrote with his prophets. And all it would take was somebody with common sense and somebody with working knowledge of both points, the agriculture and the feast days and how they work together, to figure it out. And I'm pleased to see I am not the only one in this season that sees this. There have been others. Clearly, Matthew Jensen, Troy Miller. There are several others that Miss Barbara, they see this. They can confirm this. God is a master of hiding things. And I think he did something when the Spirit was poured out to those that were in one mind and one accord. It sealed something for the rest of us in the end times, that it would be revealed, re-revealed. When he re-poured, because it's going to happen again. That's why it's important. It says he's going to pour out his Spirit again. And this is going to be greater because this is going to be on a larger portion of mankind, not just 3,000. That was the first. By the way, if you want to look at this as wheat, Shavuot, the very first one where he pours out his Spirit and 3,000 are saved, that is a very small portion of the whole. So it can be considered the first fruits. The harvest that's yet to come, me and you, is even greater when he pours out his Spirit in that time. And then we tabernacle with him, concluding the feast that he's going to fulfill these feasts to the moment, folks. And so when the greater harvest happens, or the greater exodus, whatever you want to call it, there's so many parallels here. We tabernacle with him, which is the conclusion of the feast season, the conclusion of the harvest season. It all fits together. This has been one of the most difficult things to teach, folks, because I think it's a spiritual strong point and a stumbling block for a lot of people. And what happened on that day, I think the enemy wants to conceal that. If it's not Yah concealing it, it's the enemy. But it's definitely concealed. So I hope you will consider what I'm telling you. Go and research yourself. Look at these things. I'm not making this up, and I am not crazy. Shalom to you. May Yah bless you. I hope this blesses you. Shalom.